Hey everyone, and welcome back to OntarioCryptids. First, I want to thank those who provided feedback on last week's stories of what kind of cryptids these folks encountered. And for today's encounter stories, we're going to be heading to Oklahoma, Pennsylvania, and Washington, not necessarily in that order. And if these stories remind you of an incident that you may have had, then please forward your stories to OntarioCryptids@gmail.com, where it could be shared in a safe environment. By the way, I'm digging deep for more encounters which took place in Ontario on military bases. I did find one, but it was an interview with a specific person, and well, it doesn't feel right to retell that story. Okay, go grab yourself a beverage and get cozy in your favorite spot and sit back and relax. Okay, the first encounter takes place in October of 2010. It takes place in Cryptids County, Washington, and the nearest location is Tenaway Wilderness area. I was hiking about 2 to 3 miles from our camp in Wenatchee National Forest, and I was sitting on a bluff that gave an excellent view of the surrounding ridges. After a while of sitting and seeing nothing, I hear a series of heavy-sounding thuds that sound like they were in the rhythm of a person walking. I had no idea what it was. I thought maybe it was a deer bouncing away, but it didn't quite sound right. The thuds were almost cartoonishly heavy and loud. Then about 5 minutes later, I hear what sounds exactly like someone banging two rocks together. I was still deeply confused as to what the sounds could be. It sounded like it was maybe 40 or 50 yards away, just into the tree line and brush out of sight. I got up and grabbed my rifle and started down to where the sound was. When it was about 10 feet from the trees, I had a Sasquatch epiphany, so to speak, realizing it might be a Sasquatch. Every hair on my body stood on end, and I made my way immediately back to the top of the bluff. I was still hearing the rocks banging, so I grabbed 2 rocks and banged them 3 times back at it. There was a pause, and then I heard 3 bangs back. I went back and forth with this thing for about 10 to 15 minutes. It would mimic the number of bangs I would make. I do 2 bangs, it does 2 bangs. I do 4 bangs, it does 4 bangs. I was far too freaked out at this point to investigate further, especially because it was getting dark. I made my way back to camp and shared the story. There's only one way to access that area, and nobody else had been up there. My friend suggested that maybe a bear was snapping its jaw, but there was a nearby gut pile from a deer my brother had shot earlier that day that was untouched. If a bear was in the area, I would think it would have investigated the guts. Later, I had my dad stand about as far away from me as I thought the sounds were, and I had him bang 2 rocks. It sounded exactly the same. I'm not sure what it could have been other than a Sasquatch. We were the only people camping up that road. The second encounter takes place in August of 2016 in Butler County, Pennsylvania. And this one takes place in Moraine State Park. It had to be the summer of 2015, 16, or 17. I was camping with my son's troop in Moraine State Park in Butler County, Pennsylvania. I woke up in the middle of the night. I want to say it was around midnight, but I cannot be sure. This would have been a Friday night into Saturday morning. I was taken back by how quiet the woods were. Being a seasoned tent camper, this struck me as odd. Our tent was the closest to the shoreline, maybe 30 or 40 yards of woods between us and the shore. The deep woods were on the other side of a trail road from our tent site. Up the shoreline, I heard what sounded like a tree or rock knock. The knock continued for a little bit and was eventually answered by other knocks coming from two distinct locations in the deep woods. The answered call seemed pretty far in the distance, but still audible. The original knock came from our side of the shore and was closer than the other two. This happened for a little while. The answering calls never changed, but the knock on our side kept getting closer to our tent site. I was actually astonished at how fast the knocks were moving down the shoreline. By that I mean the knock source closest to us was coming towards our campsite, working its way down the shoreline. Whatever was making the knocks was moving at a good speed for being in the woods at night. Then the knock stopped right when it felt like the source was directly behind us. The following night was Saturday. I woke up again, but this time the woods were their normal sounding selves, and there was boat life on the lake. I did hear another knock fairly distant in the woods, but that was the only one. This is the last story of the day, and it takes place July 2021. It takes place in Ofuskee County, Oklahoma. This took place in mid-July this past year in Okemah, Oklahoma. My boyfriend and I live in Edmond, Oklahoma area, but we had to come down to Okemah with a few friends for the annual Woodfest Music Festival to celebrate Woody Guthrie. The day was pretty normal. We unpacked our tent from my Xterra. It was a small 2-person tent and looked silly next to a giant 10-person tent our friends were staying in. We were camping out in this gigantic wide open field. Near the desolate road, there was a small house erected with showers and a pool behind it. The rest of the field was filled with tents. I called my mother to check in with her because I had missed a call from her while driving, and we continued to unpack our stuff, cooler, guitar, etc. The camping spots were pretty spread out except for ours because we shared a camping spot with our friends, so we almost literally shared a tent wall with them. Anyways, into the night we go. We attend the festival in a neighboring field and come back to the tents around 12:31 a.m. We chat with our friends in the other tent and then head back to ours to go to sleep. I wake up for apparently no reason at around 4:15 a.m. Most of the campground is quiet, though I can hear singing and guitar being played a fair distance behind us. The way our tent was set up, facing west from back of the tent, was the whole of the campground. We were a bit on the outskirts. Facing east from the front of the tent was a wide open field with overgrown fence and barbed wire fence, maybe 100 feet away from us. I'm awake, trying to go back to sleep, when I hear something calling my name. It sounds far away, but also as if it was right in my ear. I had no idea where the sound was coming from at first. Upon further inspection, the voice seemed to be coming from the field facing the front of the tent. I honestly had no idea how I came to this conclusion. Initially, I passed it off as maybe being sleep deprived or possibly sleep paralysis. I don't have a history of sleep paralysis, but I genuinely have no idea what this was. I turned to look at my boyfriend, who was sleeping soundly. And about 30 seconds later, I hear my name being called again. But this time, the thing is asking me to come to it. I finally figure out what it sounds like. The voice sounds almost like my mother's voice, but it's not quite there. There is an undertone to it that I can't pinpoint, but it just doesn't sound like my mother. I feel cold, vulnerable, and terrified rather than under the warm and protective aura of my mother. I instantly freeze. I cannot move a muscle. I'm sitting upright in the tent now, just frozen. I can't move or make a sound to wake up my boyfriend. I just sit and listen. I still can't exactly figure out where the sound is coming from as it switches between the field and right in my ear. This goes on for 30 minutes. The only part of my body that I could move were my eyes. My boyfriend has a calculator watch on his left arm that he had dangling out of his sleeping bag, and I could barely see the clock from my outmost peripheral vision. It called my name and asked me to come to it for a half hour. Then it stopped as quickly as it began. I still didn't move a muscle. Eventually, after about 15 minutes of silence, I laid back down. I took this time to note that all of the cicadas had stopped chirping. There were no bugs, no frogs, no birds, nothing. Not even a guitar was playing anymore. I suddenly hear the voice again, but it sounds like it's coming from right outside the tent almost, although still far away. This time, the voice is demanding that I come to it and demanding that I come out now. I lay frozen on the ground as this goes on for another 15 minutes. Then it stops. I fall back asleep almost immediately, practically almost on top of my boyfriend. I didn't hear the voice again for the rest of the night. I didn't mention it until months later. I woke up and convinced myself that it was probably just a dream, but I'm not so sure. After learning about the paranormal and talking about this with my friends, I'm almost 100% sure that I had an encounter with a Skinwalker. This is my first ever post on Reddit. I had to retell the story after rehashing it with a good friend of mine earlier tonight. All thoughts and comments are much appreciated. I'm still trying to figure out what I heard that night. Thank you. Okay, guys, there you have it. 3 fantastic stories. I hope you guys enjoyed it. This last one kind of creeped me out. There are a few cryptids out there that do mimic, so I'm not sure which one this person encountered. Stories number 1 and 2 were also very fascinating. I think they were probably Sasquatches. That's what sticks out to me anyways. But yeah, that's going to wrap it up for today. I am going to continue to look for those military base encounter stories and see what I can dig up. But for now, I'm going to leave you guys off with these 3. I hope you guys enjoyed them. And speaking of stories, if you have an encounter that you would like to get off your chest, then please forward your stories to OntarioCryptids@gmail.com. I would be honored to share your story on this channel. Thank you all for listening until the end. I truly appreciate it. Please hit that like button on your way out and smash that subscribe button if you're new to my channel. And lastly, have yourself a great weekend, and I hope to see you all next week right here on Ontario Cryptids.